glory, glory. Hallelujah. Since I laid
Odetta died on Tuesday of this week, singing Glory, Hallelujah in this piece. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Juan.
Well, 17 years after the Gulf War, a congressionally mandated committee has concluded that Gulf War syndrome is a legitimate condition that continues to affect 1/4 of the nearly 700,000 U.S. soldiers deployed in that war. In a report presented last month to the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, the Research Advisory Committee on Gulf War Veterans Illnesses said, quote, scientific evidence leaves no question that Gulf War illness is a real condition with real causes and serious consequences for affected veterans. The 450-page report details the serious, long-standing, and sometimes permanent neurotoxic damage seen in veterans of the 1991 war with Iraq. It concludes that the condition was primarily caused by overexposure to pesticides and a drug given to troops to protect against nerve gas. The U.S. government has long denied the existence of Gulf War syndrome, despite growing evidence and claims by veterans. Gulf War veterans were often told they were suffering the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder, and their symptoms were trivialized. The report says that no effective treatment has been found so far and emphasizes the need for further research.
Anthony Hardy is a veteran of the Gulf War, a member of the Research Advisory Committee that authored the report. He's National Secretary and Legislative Chair of Veterans of Modern Warfare and a former officer with the National Gulf War Resource Center, joining us from Madison, Wisconsin. Welcome to Democracy Now! Anthony, you're sick as well?
Yes, that's right.
Can you tell us what you suffer from?
Absolutely. I've had health issues ever since being in the Gulf. First, about 2/3 of the group that I was with began to be ill from the pyridostigmine bromide, or the nerve agent protective pills that we took. And then once in Kuwait, began having severe respiratory and sinus issues. Those have continued and have progressed into the kinds of chronic multi-symptom illness that I'm certainly far from unique. Between 175 and 210,000 of my fellow Gulf War veterans are suffering from the same kinds of symptoms and illness that I'm suffering from, and many far worse than my situation.
Well, could you tell us a little bit about what the report concluded? Because obviously there's been a lot of debate over the years about the many possible causes of what came to be called as Gulf War syndrome.
Well, that's right. Well, it was an exhaustive study of about a survey of about 1,800 scientific studies, and I want to clarify the report was written by the scientists on the committee, and there are 5 of us Gulf War veterans on the committee, and we assisted in reviewing the report, but it was a scientific report. And the study concluded that pyridostigmine bromide, or the nerve agent protective pills, and pesticides were the two could be linked causally to the health effects of Gulf War veterans, and the majority who are suffering from chronic multi-symptom illness. It also determined that we could not rule out a number of other potential causes, including low-level nerve agent and chemical warfare agent exposure throughout the Gulf War, and a number of other causes. It suggested that things like depleted uranium, while there are known health effects, including cancers, was probably not the cause of the chronic multi-symptom illness affecting most Gulf War veterans, but it certainly didn't rule out that depleted uranium has health effects of its own.
Were you surprised by any of the findings, Anthony Hardy? And talk about the significance of this being well over a dozen years since you were serving in the Gulf.
Well, 17 years after the war, the report says what we Gulf War veterans have been saying all along, and that's that we have health issues, that those health issues began during the Gulf, that they have progressed since then, that they have been largely unabated, and that they're continuing. So the report says in scientific terms what we've been saying all along. Now, the most disappointing thing is that current VA Secretary Dr. James Peake said during his presentation that we neither deny nor trivialize the health issues of Gulf War veterans. Yet just a few days later, Secretary Peake and the federal VA referred the report, rather than jumping on its conclusions and making benefits and health care changes for Gulf War veterans, referred it to yet another committee, the Institute of Medicine, deciding that they needed further evidence. And it's awfully disappointing that still 17 years after the war, nearly 200,000 Gulf War veterans still remain ill and are not getting adequate health care from the federal VA. And as I testified before Congress last year, being seen is not the same thing as being treated, and to add further to that, treating symptoms is not the same thing as treating the disease.
And this pill that many of the soldiers took, were they forced to take this pill? Could they refuse it? And what were you told at the time when the military administered it?
That the pill was the pyridostigmine bromide pill, also known as the nerve agent protective pill, and it was to help us to survive a nerve agent attack, helping to make sure that the atropine injectors that we had would be more successful in saving our lives if we were exposed to nerve agents. I understand that throughout the Gulf War theater of operations that it varied on how Gulf War troops were taking the pills. In my group, I think we were more of the typical type in that we were mandated to take the pills. In fact, as a supervisor, I was required to physically watch my soldiers put the pill into their mouth, swallow it, and make sure that they had taken it, again, because that there were these measures were taken because that there were significant side effects for so many of us. Again, in my group, about 2/3 of us had pretty significant side effects.
Anthony,
at the time
did people resist?
Some were concerned about it, but it was mandated, and it's the military, and we do what we were told.
Were they approved by the FDA?
My understanding at the time was that there was a waiver given by the FDA to the U.S. Department of Defense that waived informed consent, and we were told that at the time, told that it was an experimental drug, but that we were still required to take it. And experimental in the sense
And the immediate effects that you had at the time?
Like we were told, we would have the symptoms of low-level nerve agent exposure, so watery eyes, respiratory issues, runny nose, diarrhea, upset stomach, tremors, fatigue, all those sorts of things, and feeling just simply feeling very ill.
Can you tell us what the Kuwaiti cough is, Anthony Hardy?
Sure, that's a nickname that some of us Gulf War veterans gave our cough that we developed while over in the Gulf and then came back with. I coughed up black sputum for the last 2 months that I was there. I was excited when the war is over I could start running again. Began running and breathing in that black oil well fire smoke that colored my sputum black. But coughing up significant chunks of large chunks about the size of a large gumball. From my lungs. Believe now that those are probably pieces of lung tissue from exposure to chemical warfare agents, and then colored black from the oil well fire smoke as well. But many of us came back and we had this cough, continued thereafter, and while running, then we would use our asthma inhalers, determined later that we did not have asthma. But joked that was our, sort
Anthony,
of our
we just have 20 seconds, and I wanted to know, with the report out, what do you want to see happen right now?
We need to see, most of all, treatment, effective treatment for Gulf War veterans. It's been 17 years, and that's an awful long time to wait for effective treatment. For those who are not getting compensation, of course, they need to be compensated, but most importantly, treating those who are ill.
And thank you for being with us, Anthony Hardy, joining us from Madison, Wisconsin, member of the Research Advisory Committee on Gulf War Veterans' Illnesses, just came out with its report, and National Secretary and Legislative Chair of Veterans of Modern Warfare. And that does it for today's broadcast. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Berkshire, Hodokadu, Sarah Mate, Angelique Comet, Steve Martinez, Nicole Salazar, Honey Massoud, and Robbie Karen, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, and Peter Curry's our engineers. Democracy Now! Is headed to Sweden next week, to Stockholm on Monday and Tuesday, where we'll be broadcasting, and hopefully broadcasting as well from Germany. You can get an update on our website for all the details. If you live in those places, I'd love to meet you, viewers and listeners. democracynow.org is the site to go to. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez for another edition of Democracy Now!